It's 50 years and counting since Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, and yet the Apollo missions still represent the farthest that humanity has ventured into space. How did this effort that culminated in one of our greatest ever achievements transpire? This is the history of NASA's Project Apollo. In early 1960, the Eisenhower administration envisioned Project Apollo as the successor to the ongoing Project Mercury, which was the first human spaceflight program in the US. Compared to Mercury's capacity to hold a single astronaut, Apollo would be able to support 3 crew members. By November 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected US president on a platform that criticized Eisenhower's foreign policy. Kennedy pointed to the missile gap, a belief that the US was falling behind the Soviet Union in ICBM technology. In early 1961, both the US and Soviet space programs were at relatively similar levels. If this status quo had continued, Project Apollo may have gone in a completely different direction. This was shattered on April 12, 1961, when cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space and completed 1 full orbit around the planet. Although Alan Shepard became the first American in space less than a month later, it was part of a 15-minute suborbital flight. It took nearly another year for John Glenn to become the first American to orbit the Earth. On the 25th of May, 1961, President Kennedy announced Project Apollo as a mission to land astronauts on the surface of the moon by the end of the decade.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Eager to leapfrog the Soviet Union, a moon landing was seen as sufficiently ambitious yet theoretically feasible to accomplish before 1970. Although Congress immediately increased NASA's budget, Administrator James Webb was concerned that enthusiasm would decrease as the project dragged on. However, Kennedy's assassination in November 1963 solidified Project Apollo as a key part of his legacy. Kennedy's successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, was also a champion of space exploration, which put Project Apollo on firmer footing for the rest of the decade. The actual method NASA intended to use to reach the moon is known as a lunar orbit rendezvous. This would consist of launching a single spacecraft that would enter lunar orbit, with a small lander breaking off and reaching the surface. The lander would then return to the larger spacecraft, be discarded once the crew and cargo were transferred aboard, with the main spacecraft then returning to the Earth. In 1960, NASA began supporting the development of the Saturn family of boosters that were being built under Wernher von Braun. The largest of these, Saturn V, would become the launch vehicle for Project Apollo. It was a 3-stage rocket, used liquid fuel, and was taller than the Statue of Liberty, at 363 feet. Generating 7.5 million pounds of thrust, it could lift 140 tons to low Earth orbit, and until the launch of the SLS in November 2022, the Saturn V was the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown. The second component of the lunar missions was the Apollo spacecraft, which consisted of the service and command modules. The vehicle could support 3 astronauts for up to 2 weeks on their voyage to and from the moon. The pressurized command module was where crew members could control the spacecraft and the only section that returned to Earth intact. The final component of Project Apollo was the lunar module, which was attached to the command and service modules. This vehicle would separate from the main spacecraft upon reaching the moon, land, and then return once the astronauts completed their mission. It could support 2 astronauts for 48 hours on the lunar surface. After years of development, Apollo 8 was launched in December 1968, with astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders on a mission to orbit the moon. This mission helped provide important data for NASA as it prepared for a landing on the lunar surface. The crew also took this iconic image of the Earth as a lone blue marble in the empty sea of space. On July 16, 1969, the time had come for the mission the entire world was anticipating, as Apollo 11 took flight. 4 days later, astronaut Neil Armstrong took humanity's first steps on the moon. He was joined by astronaut Buzz Aldrin, while Michael Collins orbited in the command module. An estimated 650 million people around the world watched Armstrong in one of the most monumental events in human history. In November of the same year, Apollo 12 took off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida for a second lunar landing mission. By this time, the American public's interest was already waning, and the launch had far less attention than Apollo 11. Nevertheless, Pete Conrad and Alan Bean set foot on the moon on November 19th, while Richard Gordon remained in lunar orbit. Apollo 13 is one of the most well-known Apollo missions, since it was the only one that failed in its primary objective to land on the moon. Due to an explosion in the service module's oxygen tank, a large amount of the gas was vented into space. As a result, the crew had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. In the end, the crew canceled a lunar landing and used the moon's gravity to slingshot their way back to Earth, where they landed safely on April 17, 1970. By September 1970, Apollo 18, 19, and 20 had all been cancelled due to funding cuts, leaving Apollo 14 through 17 as the last remaining lunar voyages. These missions centered more on scientific goals compared to the previous missions, which were more focused on overcoming the engineering challenges of landing on the moon. Some major highlights included Alan Shepard playing golf, the collection of more moon rock, and the use of rovers on the lunar surface. Following Project Apollo, NASA pivoted towards creating a vehicle that could transport humans into space more economically and sustainably. This eventually culminated in the Space Shuttle, which first launched in April 1981. Over its 30-year life, it flew 135 missions from 1981 to 2011. No human has set foot on the moon since 1972, marking a half-century where our species has remained in low Earth orbit. But that might be set to change. Artemis 1 launched in November 2022, with the Orion spacecraft completing an uncrewed flyby of the moon before returning to the Earth. Artemis 2, currently scheduled for 2024, will be a crewed lunar flyby, while Artemis 3 in 2025 will be the first landing since Apollo. Despite a 50-year hiatus since our last landing, the future is looking bright for manned exploration of the moon. NASA, SpaceX, and others are working hard to ensure that humans will once again set foot on lunar soil. No matter what happens moving forward, Project Apollo will remain one of the greatest achievements in human history. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to drop a like or leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see everyone in the next video.